In the quiet, catalogued world of Alara Vance, history was a series of acid-free boxes and carefully labeled folders. At 34, she was a freelance archivist, a ghost who drifted through the grand homes of the wealthy, organizing the ghosts of their pasts. It was a life of meticulous order, a penance she had designed for herself after her own life had devolved into chaos. Her latest commission had led her to the fog-shrouded gates of Blackwood Manor, an edifice of granite and sorrow that seemed to rise from the Cumbrian fells like a natural mournful peak. "He does not receive visitors," Mrs. Gable, the head of staff, had stated on the first day. Her voice was as starched and unyielding as her uniform. The large iron key she handed Elara felt like a burden. "Mr. Croft's solitude is the primary rule of this house. Your work is confined to the West Library. You will have access to the staff kitchen for luncheon. You will not explore. Is that understood?" Elara had simply nodded. She understood solitude. Julian Croft. The name was a literary myth, a poet whose searing, brilliant work had captured the world's heart before he had vanished completely 3 years prior, silenced by a family tragedy that the papers had only ever whispered about. The Manor itself felt like his last unpublished work, a sprawling, magnificent poem of grief. Its corridors were silent stanzas, its shrouded furniture words left unsaid. For 3 weeks, Ilara's universe shrank to the dimensions of the West Library. It was a cathedral of the written word, with soaring, book-lined walls and a scent of aged paper, leather, and beeswax. She worked with a quiet reverence, her task to sort and catalog the Croft family papers, generations of letters, manuscripts, and business dealings. It was methodical work, and in its rhythms she found a fragile peace. She learned of Julian's grandfather, a stern patriarch who founded Croft & Co. Publishing, and his father, a gentler man who nurtured its artistic soul. And she learned of Leo Croft, Julian's younger brother. His presence was a vibrant splash of color in the monochrome history. He was an artist, a sculptor. Tucked within a box of Julian's early drafts were several of Leo's sketchbooks. They were filled with dynamic, joyful drawings of the fells, of animals, of a laughing Julian. He was life itself captured in charcoal. The last entry was a rough, unfinished sketch of a man's face, half grinning. Beneath it, a single scrawled word, incomplete. Ilara's own hands, often stained with archival ink, felt a familiar, painful ache when she looked at the drawings. Before she had entombed herself in the pasts of others, she had a future of her own, one meant to be shaped from clay. A scholarship, a promising debut, a life of creation, all of it had turned to dust. It was this phantom ache that made her pause when she found it. Tucked inside a hollowed-out volume of Blake's poetry was a small, ornate brass key. A simple cardboard tag was tied to it with faded twine. On it, in Leo's energetic script, was one word, sanctuary. It was not a library key. It did not belong to any door she had been shown. But her archivist's curiosity, a single untamed instinct she had left, was piqued. Following a hunch born from an old floor plan she'd found, she ventured to a corridor in the east wing, a part of the house clearly long unused. At the very end, bathed in the pale afternoon light, was a glass-paned door. The key fit. With a groan of disuse, the lock turned. The air that met her was thick and still, carrying the scent of dried earth, linseed oil, and profound neglect. It was a conservatory, but no plants lived here. Dust lay like a fine shroud over everything. Shrouded easels stood like silent mourners. Bags of sculpting clay, hard as stone, were slumped in a corner. And in the center of the room, on a sculptor's stand, was an unfinished bust. It was the man from the sketchbook, Leo. His features were caught in a moment of brilliant, infectious laughter, his head thrown back slightly, but from the jawline down, the form dissolved into rough, unworked mass of clay. It was a life interrupted, a laugh cut short. Ilaris felt a tremor pass through her, a resonance with the piece so strong it was almost a sound. This was Leo's last work. This was his incomplete. She shouldn't have touched it. It was an artifact, part of the history she was meant to preserve, not alter. But her fingers, acting on a cellular memory, reached out. She didn't press, didn't change a thing. She simply traced the line where the finished, living clay met the raw, formless earth. A conversation left hanging. A potential unrealized. It was the story of her own life. She told herself it would be just once, a single secret pilgrimage. But the conservatory, the sanctuary, called to her. That night, long after the hum of the house had settled into the deep silence of sleep, she returned. She brought a small bowl of water and a cloth. She didn't try to finish Leo's work. She simply cleaned the dust from its surfaces, her touch gentle, reverent. Then, on a dusty workbench nearby, she found a small, pliable block of clay still sealed in plastic. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The cool, yielding texture was a homecoming. She began to work, not on a grand piece, but on a small, simple shape, a closed book, a story sealed away. She did not know she was being observed. From his study window, which overlooked the east wing, Julian Croft saw the flicker of light. He had not allowed anyone in the conservatory since the day of the accident. It was a tomb, not a studio. His first instinct was a hot surge of anger. An intrusion into the most sacred, painful part of his home. He moved towards the door, ready to confront the trespasser, to have them dismissed immediately. But something stopped him. He watched the lone figure, silhouetted against the glass. He saw the gentle way she touched his brother's work. He saw her begin a piece of her own. He watched as the intruder, the archivist, moved with a quiet, creative grace. The anger cooled, replaced by a feeling he hadn't experienced in 3 years: curiosity. The next night, when Alara crept back into the conservatory, she found a new, unopened bag of premium sculpting clay and a set of clean professional tools laid neatly beside her small, unfinished book. There was no note, no explanation. It was a silent offering, an unbelievable act of trust. With a heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, she accepted. She abandoned the book and began something new. A sculpture of a single massive key, its teeth intricate and complex, lying on its side as if too heavy to lift. Thus began their strange, silent correspondence. Each night she would sculpt, and each morning she would find a small piece of paper, folded precisely in half, left on the workbench. On it, in elegant raven-black script, was a single line of poetry. The first read, "A silence given shape by patient hands." In response, Ilara added a delicate broken chain to her sculpture of the key. The next morning, the note said, "The dust remembers what the heart would seal." That night, she began a new piece. 2 hands, cupped together, as if to hold water, but with a fine crack running through them from which nothing could be held. They were 2 isolates, communicating in the only languages they had left: form and verse. Through her work in the archives, Sue pieced together more of the story. She found a letter from Julian's father to a friend expressing concern over the growing friction between his sons. Julian, pragmatic and protective of the family legacy, wanted to steer Croft & Co. towards more commercial, profitable ventures. Leo, the idealist, had fought him fiercely, arguing that they were guardians of art, not merchants of pulp. It was a battle for the soul of the company. One evening, deep within a dusty ledger, she found what she was looking for: a police report, clipped and tucked away. Leo Croft, aged 22, had died in a motorcycle accident on a rain-slicked road, just a few miles from the manor. The date was the day after his last entry in the sketchbook. The story was now complete, and its tragedy was almost unbearable. That night in the conservatory, her own work felt hollow. She found herself standing before Leo's bust, and for the first time, she allowed her own hands to shape the clay. She didn't try to finish the piece.
Instead, she gently smoothed the rough, angry edges where the form met the raw clay, softening the brutal transition, as if to ease its passage from life to incompletion. It was an act of mourning. The next morning, the note waiting for her was longer. "We finish nothing, we but learn to leave. The jagged edge where laughter turns to stone is smoothed by hands that know their own to grieve."
That evening, he was there. Julian Croft was waiting for her, standing by his brother's sculpture. In person, he was taller than she'd imagined, and his stillness was not empty, but dense, like a collapsed star. His eyes, the color of a winter sea, held a galaxy of sorrow. "Leo would have liked what you're doing," he said. His voice was a low rustle, a sound unaccustomed to use. "He always said this room was for making things, not for preserving them." "The poetry," Alara began, her own voice barely a whisper. "I thought the poet was gone." "He was," Julian said, his gaze fixed on her sculpture of the cracked, cupped hands, "until an archivist started cataloging the silence." Their strange, silent communion finally broke into spoken word. Over the following weeks, the conservatory became their shared space. They talked for hours, surrounded by the ghosts of their pasts. Julian spoke of Leo, of their shared childhood, and their diverging dreams. He confessed the weight of his guilt over their final argument, a bitter, shouting match about a lucrative but soulless thriller series Julian was about to acquire for the publishing house. "He told me I was selling his soul, and I told him he was a child who didn't understand business," Julian recounted, his voice thick with regret. "He grabbed his motorcycle keys and stormed out into the rain. I never saw him again." The story resonated with a painful clarity for Alara. Emboldened by his honesty, she told him of her own ghost. She had been the most promising student in her university's fine arts program, partnered on a major final installation with her best friend Cora. But Cora, driven by a desperate, hidden jealousy, had subtly altered their final proposal after Alara had signed off, then presented early drafts of Alara's solo work as their joint preliminary sketches. When the final piece was unveiled, primarily Alara's concept and execution, Cora had feigned shock and accused Alara of cutting her out and stealing the shared concept. Faced with conflicting evidence and the word of two trusted students, the faculty had chosen the path of least resistance. They hadn't formally expelled Alara, but a quiet word from her mentor had made her future clear. The accusation, though never proven, would follow her. The scholarship was revoked. Humiliated and heartbroken, Alara had walked away from it all. "I didn't fight," she confessed to Julian, her gaze on her own hands. I disappeared. It was easier to become a ghost than to face the accusation of being a thief." Their shared confessions forged a new, deeper intimacy. Julian began to write again, not just single lines, but whole stanzas, which he would leave for her. In return, Alara's sculpting regained its lost confidence, her forms becoming bolder, more expressive. They were healing each other, finding in their shared art a way back to themselves. But the world outside Blackwood Manor had not forgotten Julian Croft. His brother-in-law, Marcus Thorne, was the acting CEO of Croft & Company. Marcus was a man of sharp suits and sharper instincts, a pragmatist who had managed to keep the company profitable in Julian's absence by steering it precisely in the commercial direction Leo had so despised. The news of Julian's reemergence and the influence of a mysterious archivist reached him in London and filled him with alarm. He arrived without warning, a sleek disruption to the manor's quiet rhythm. He found Julian and Alara in the conservatory, a space he hadn't seen opened in years. His eyes swept over the room, taking in the sculptures, the scattered pages of poetry, and the easy intimacy between the two of them.
His smile was a thin, polished veneer. "Julian, it's good to see you looking occupied," he said, his gaze lingering on Alara with a dismissive chill. "Eleanor has been so worried. We all have." Marcus's agenda quickly became clear. He was courting a major investment group for a new mass-market digital imprint. It was the thriller series Julian had been pursuing before Leo's death, magnified tenfold. He needed Julian's signature, his blessing as the majority shareholder. He saw Alara not as a person, but as a dangerous variable, an artistic indulgence threatening a multi-million-pound deal.
The confrontation he engineered was not a private argument, but a public execution. He arranged a dinner at the Manor for the investors, a small, powerful group. Alara, at Julian's insistence, was to be there. She felt like a lamb being led into a boardroom, dressed in a simple dark dress that felt like armor and camouflage all at once. The dining room, which she had only ever seen shrouded in dust cloths, was now ablaze with candlelight, the long mahogany table gleaming, the air thick with the scent of expensive wine and an unspoken tension. The dinner was a tense affair. Marcus controlled the conversation, speaking of market shares, revenue streams, and growth projections. He was charming, witty, and utterly ruthless. Julian was quiet, a reluctant king in his own court, answering direct questions with a terse precision, but offering nothing more. He seemed a world away from the man who left poetry on a dusty workbench. Alara remained silent, an observer, feeling the weight of the investors' curious glances. They were assessing her, trying to understand her place in this complicated power dynamic. Finally, after the main course plates were cleared, Marcus made his move. He rose, tapping his wine glass for attention. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. He raised his glass to his brother-in-law. "A toast to Julian, to his return to us. We have all missed his unique vision. Julian has always been the artistic soul of our family," he continued, a predatory warmth in his tone. "It is his great gift, but it is also his vulnerability. A great artistic temperament, as we all know, can be suggestible. It must be protected from influences that are less than credible." He turned his gaze cold and precise on Alara. She felt it like a physical touch, a pin fixing a butterfly to a board. Our current archivist, Miss Vance, for example. She is, I'm told, a sculptor of some talent, a talent she was forced to abandon after a rather unfortunate scandal involving artistic fraud during her university days. The silence that fell upon the table was absolute, a sudden vacuum that sucked all the warmth from the room. Alara felt the heat of a dozen pairs of eyes on her, the air thick with unspoken judgment. The old shame, cold and horribly familiar, washed over her, and for a terrifying second she felt 18 again, standing alone in a sterile university office. "Marcus, that is enough," Julian said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a shard of ice, a low thunder that promised a storm. "The investors deserve to know who has the ear of our chairman," Marcus pressed on, his voice rising with practiced indignation, playing the part of the concerned guardian. "They are about to commit significant capital to our vision. They need to be assured that the future of this company is not being shaped by the whispers of a disgraced artist with a history of passing off others' work as her own."
In that moment, something inside Alara, something that had been dormant and afraid for over a decade, broke free. She had run once. She had let a lie define her. She would not do it again. She stood slowly, her hands resting on the table to still their trembling, and met Marcus's triumphant gaze without flinching. "What Mr. Thorne refers to was a partnership that ended with a false accusation," she said, her voice quiet but carrying with perfect clarity across the silent room. I have never claimed another's art as my own. My greatest failure was not in my art, but in my silence. It was my failure to fight for my work and for my own truth. That is a mistake I will not be making again." Her words hung in the air, simple, unadorned, and powerful. The investors looked from her to Marcus, their expressions shifting from curiosity to a new, sharper assessment. But it was Julian who held the room. He rose, not with anger, but with a profound, unshakable calm. He was holding a single sheet of paper. He did not look at Marcus. He looked only at Alara, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. "I have not written for an audience in 3 years," he said, his voice finding a resonance Alara had never heard before, the voice of the poet the world remembered. "I learned that art is not about an audience. It is about a single, honest moment of connection." He then began to read the poem he had written that afternoon. It was a poem titled Sanctuary. It spoke of locked rooms and the ghosts we choose to keep. It spoke of integrity, of the beauty of unfinished things, and of the scars that prove a work is authentic. It spoke of a light found in a dusty, forgotten place, and of the courage it takes to create again, even when your tools are broken. It did not mention Marcus, or the university, or the business deal, but its meaning was unmistakable. When he finished, the room was utterly still. Julian had not defended or argued, he had simply offered a truth so pure it was unassailable. The lead investor, a formidable woman named Alistair Finch, known for her cutthroat business sense, but also for her renowned private art collection, slowly raised her wineglass. "To the soul of the company, Mr. Croft," she said, her sharp eyes twinkling as she looked between Julian and Alara. "It appears to be in very capable hands." The deal Marcus had worked so hard to build on a foundation of soulless commerce collapsed in an instant. The investors were still interested, Alistair Finch made clear, but now they were interested in Julian's vision, not his. Later that night, in the quiet sanctuary of the conservatory, Julian came to Alara. He was holding a long, slender box carved from dark wood. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was not jewelry, but a set of exquisite custom-made sculpting tools. Each handle was carved from blackwood from the Manor grounds and tipped in gleaming steel. Engraved on the handle of the finest, most delicate chisel was the last line of his poem: "Where truth resides, the art is never broken." "This house has been a prison for me, Alara," he said softly, his hand finding hers. "You walked in and reminded me that it could be a home, a studio, a sanctuary. Don't just catalog the past here. Stay and help me build a future." Tears she hadn't realized she was holding back traced a warm path down her cheeks. She took the chisel, its weight a perfect, solid promise in her hand. "Yes," she whispered. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through the clean glass panes of the conservatory. It was no longer a place of neglect, but one of vibrant creation. At one end, Alara worked on a life-size stone figure, the crisp sound of her chisel a counterpoint to the soft scratch of Julian's pen on paper at the other end. Leo's unfinished bust stood on a place of honor, no longer a symbol of grief, but a smiling tribute to the brother who had brought them together. Under Julian's new leadership, Croft & Company had launched the Leo Croft Prize, a major grant for emerging artists and writers who valued integrity over commerce. Blackwood Manor, once a silent monument to loss, now hosted workshops and retreats for these young talents. The silence was gone, replaced by the hum of shared creation, a love story written in verse and carved in stone. A testament to the enduring truth that the most beautiful things are often those that have been broken and lovingly, patiently made whole again.
Perhaps we will not see you again, so subscribe to this channel to listen to more interesting stories.